Test, test.
I can hear you, Alex. I think that was Alex.
It was, thank you.
I don't think I can hear any of the commissioners though yet.
Can you hear us now, Sam?
Oh, yep, I can hear you now.
Okay. All right, we've got our mics turned off until we need them, so. You guys say the word when you're ready. Okay. Okay, we would like to welcome everyone to the January 17th, 2024 Cottonwood Heights Planning Commission business session. And first of all, ask among our planning commissioners, we have a quorum, and are there any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose? And noted that no one has acknowledged any. We have, just to review the agenda, we will have the general comment, public comment period, and then we have 2 business items to cover today. And I don't believe we have, do we have any minutes that we need to review? I don't believe that we have anything. To
No
take
minutes this time, where this one was kind of like a quick, second meeting of the month. We're a little bit off with when our minutes are ready. So we'll hit them at the February 7th meeting.
No worries. Okay, with that in mind, we will go to the general public comment. So this is an opportunity for individuals to make general public comments that do not relate to any project scheduled for public hearing under the business section of this agenda. So just as a reminder, there will be 3 minutes per public comment. And I have just one speaker comment card here. But if we have others that are either online or present, again, if you're speaking to one of our business items, save that for when we get to the individual business item. But I have a comment card from Don Smart. Don, is your comment related to one of the business items? Okay, are you okay if we wait until we get to that? Fantastic. Okay, any other comments, just general public comments that anyone would like to make? Please. Go ahead and come to the microphone and tell us your name. And
my name is Michael Balt, and I'm a new resident to Cottonwood Heights, relocated from Seattle in July.
welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with my family. And I do have a comment related to one of the items. However, if this is appropriate, one of the things that my wife and I have experienced is that we are actually in the property that's adjacent to the one that we'll be talking about later. So it's not related to that technically. However, in our new community, we found that there's an Airbnb, and we've just had really no luck getting anywhere with, the enforcement of the regulation through no fault of anybody at the city. The city's been very helpful, but I don't know if there's anything possible to do in terms of trying to actually stop them from doing that. The owner has told us that they wouldn't be doing it, but yet we've been recording when people come and go. I've talked to and I forget the officer's name that I've talked to a few times, but typically they're here for skiing. So by the time that individual gets there, they're already out on the slopes, and then they come back and, the officer is no longer around. It just seems like a very odd thing. We're new to this. We've never lived in an area with Airbnbs. And so to have one in our community was not what we were expecting. Nor it's also something that the builder had said was not allowed as well. So we're trying to go through legal actions with the builder, but just something that's a little disappointing. We love Cottonwood Heights, but this was, we were hoping to get to know our neighbors, not Airbnb guests. So forgive me if this was inappropriate for mentioning at this forum, but if there's any feedback, maybe even separately, I welcome any resources or ways that we can maybe go about trying to get them to stop doing this and maybe have it be more of a family-oriented neighborhood. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And, that opportunity to share that with the city council as well. Those comments are always noted. And just as a little bit of clarification, we've taken a fairly aggressive stance as a city. However, that is superseded by state law. And so our legislature is in session, and I would call your state legislators on that issue, because there are a lot of those decisions are made at a higher level than this body. But I think many of us share your concerns. So thank you for your comment.
Can I add a little bit?
Please.
So there was, I worked with our state representative.
Is your microphone turned on?
Yeah, I think so.
There we go.
So I worked with our state representative, Benyon, 2 years ago on a piece of legislation it got presented, but it got tabled and never made it in. But I believe in this, in the general session now, I think she's brought it back up in terms of there's actual specific legislation to deal with this. A couple of years back, the state passed a law that basically outlawed or it hamstrung a city's response and ability to actually regulate short-term rentals. And so it made it illegal for a city to even go on Airbnb and VRBO and preemptively say you're advertising, and so we're going to cite you. They said it doesn't matter. You can go ahead and do that, and it's the activity that you can regulate. But it obviously becomes much more complex because you have to catch them in the act, and then each instance becomes a thing, and the fine wasn't that much. That was kind of the cost of doing business. But I believe it's before the general session this year also, so you may want to kind of look at it at the state level, but the city level is it's really hard to regulate. But yeah, I mean, I think we all share your pain, but I was actually going to make a comment similar to this in terms of the sport court regulations, because no one likes regulations, but it does have impacts. So,
Thank you. Okay, we'll move forward to our business items if there's no further public comment at this time. We have two business items. The first one, 3.1, project ZMA-23-002, a public hearing and possible action on a zoning map amendment request to rezone 0.45 acres of property at 7980 South Danish Oaks Drive from RR-1-21 rural residential single family to R-1-10 residential single family. And I believe we have a presentation from staff.
Yeah, I'll just check my logistics before I start. Are y'all seeing that presentation okay on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And I'm assuming you're hearing me at a good volume. Same disclaimer as before. If you need me to adjust anything, just interrupt me and let me know. Okay, so this is indeed the presentation for ZMA 23002. It's a zoning map amendment, which is the same term for a rezone. I am planning to go through these full slides just since we have a few different attendees in this meeting than we did in the work session, if that's okay with the commission.
Yes.
Okay, great, awesome. So this is just a summary slide with some details about the property. It is addressed at 7980 South Danish Oaks Drive. This is definitely an odd address for the property since it's not really accessed off that street, but I will confirm that's the address given to it by Salt Lake County. The request is a zoning map amendment from RR-121 to R-110. So from a rural residential single family zone to a residential single family zone. And we are recommending approval of this project. For the Planning Commission, that would just constitute forwarding a recommendation of approval to the City Council, since it's a legislative item. Okay, so this is the vicinity map for the property. We see that it's just off of Bengal Boulevard. It's accessed off of Danish Pine Lane through the Danish Pine subdivision. You see the property here in the blue, and then just kind of a wider view showing it in context of the broader city. We've got Wasatch Boulevard here on the right, and then Bengal Boulevard running down this way. Okay, so this is a summary of the request. Again, we're looking at a request to rezone the property from RR-121 to R-110. If we look here on our map, the stars indicate the parcels that are owned by the applicant. So the applicant owns the subject property, which has the blue highlight. They also own the two adjacent properties. They wish to combine all three parcels into one property. But in order to do a lot consolidation, there needs to be unilateral zoning across the three, which is why this application is here. So here's a map showing the current zoning and then the proposed zoning on the right. You would see if it were approved, the R110 zoning would match what's contiguous to the parcel. A little bit of background on the property. This kind of isolated zoning, if we look here, the light green kind of island of the subject property is fairly recent. Prior to 2019, the area to the north was also zoned RR-121. That was before the Danish Pine subdivision came in. And then through a zoning map amendment in 2019, for the Danish Pines subdivision, that area was rezoned to R110 and then subsequently divided into those lots. So that is a little bit of background on maybe why this kind of exists as a holdout or an outlier. Looking at the analysis of what's being proposed, the proposed rezone would bring the subject property into conformity with our zoning ordinance, as the property doesn't currently meet the standards for lot size in the RR121 zone, but would for the proposed R110 zone. And it also would bring the property into conformity with the land use map, which is the kind of map equivalent of the city's long range general plan. That map identifies the property as having a long-term use of low density residential, which matches the R110 proposal. The current zoning of RR121 is actually considered a rural residential density instead of low density. In terms of potential development, the permitted uses between the existing and the proposed zones are quite similar. Both have a primary function of allowing residential single family development. The main difference is that the RR121 zone has some allowances for livestock uses, but conditional uses in either zone would follow the same process. Potential development also is found to be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. Again, given that the Watson Hollow subdivision to the south and the Danish Pines subdivision to the north are both zoned R110. So staff does recommend approval of the project, recommend that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the project based on these findings, which are outlined in our staff report. I'll again mention that no written public comment was received by the public comment deadline of 12 noon yesterday. The project is scheduled for a public hearing in this meeting, and we did get 2 public comments after the cutoff, which we talked a little bit about in the work session. Mainly, they had questions about kind of the history and the context of the lot, some concerns about future development on it. And then I have your model motions, but I am happy to cover any questions as needed.
Questions from the commissioners or staff? Got most of what we needed in the work session. Thank you, Sam. That was wonderful. And do we have the applicant here? Anything that you want to share with us? Okay, then that's okay. That pretty. I don't. Do we have any specific questions for the applicant? I don't know that we do. Okay. Are there other comments from the let's see, is Don, is your comment regarding this item? Okay. So we'll open public comment on this item. Is there any public comment related to this item? Any online that we're aware of? I don't know that we saw any this time around. Okay, then we will close public comment at this time. And any further discussion from the commissioners? Are we ready? Are we ready for a motion?
I move to recommend approval to the City Council for ZMA- based on the findings and recommendations listed in the staff report dated January 17th.
Second.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Chapel and a second from Commissioner Anderson. What's in order now is further discussion of the motion. Final comments? Are we ready for the question? Okay. Commissioner Ebler.
It's full commission, so I don't get to vote.
Ah, that's right. Excuse me. Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel,
Yes.
Commissioner Polson,
Yes.
Commissioner Shelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinman,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
and Commissioner Mills is yes. Item is approved a recommendation of approval that will go to the city council. So thank you to staff and to the applicant, and wish you luck in your process.
Can I mention just really briefly, Commissioner Chappell's mic seems to be kind of cutting in and out on the recording. So I don't know if there's a way to maybe scoot it in a little bit to her or something else there, but I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing her.
Light on.
Can you hear me now, Sam?
There we go.
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, I think I just wasn't close enough. My apologies.
No, I could still like tell what you were saying, but that'll be more clear for the minutes. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to business item 3.2, project ZTA-23-004, a public hearing and possible action on a city-initiated zoning text amendment to establish standards and permitting requirements for outdoor sport courts in residential areas. And this is an item that we've worked on for a number of months and had some lengthy discussion as a group. And you can, for the public, you can refer to the previous recordings of the discussion that we've had. We've also provided some questions to the city council and gotten feedback from them as well. As a reminder that this is something that the city council has requested that we provide for them. And that if we are able to provide something, it will go to the city council and will be heard further from before any final approval of an ordinance by the city council. So we've got a staff presentation. Yes?
I have nothing further unless you'd like an overview of the ordinance or have any questions.
I think it's in a number of different places memorialized in recordings, so I think it would probably be redundant. And I would just ask in our discussion, I think we've made a lot of points, so I would ask that we are careful not to rehash. If you have something unique to add to the discussion based on things that we've seen, let's make sure that's covered. But I'm anxious we don't use this as an opportunity to reiterate necessarily, because we all have some feelings on this. So with that in mind, what would you like to add to the discussion here?
I have a comment, if that's all right,
Please.
Chairman. We have had a good discussion on this. One thing that I haven't heard much about is if the city has undertaken an effort to promote civility within our community. It seems that if we can encourage neighbors to be good neighbors, some of the intensity of this issue would be dispelled a little bit. And whatever happens, whether we have some new enforcement, some new code here or not, I think if we can encourage that among our members of our community, I think that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're discussing as if there was a staff presentation. So technically, we would need a motion in order to get to public comment. Is that, am I missing something in terms of Robert's rules?
I don't think it's public comment, it's comment within, it'd be comment within the vote. So you would have public comment, and then there would have to be a motion second, and then we would discuss it. There's nothing to discuss amongst ourselves right now.
Correct. Well, then let's go to public comment then. So Don, I think you're front and center here. So you've got your 3 minutes of fame.
I'll
Looking forward
hurry.
to you enlightening us.
Thanks so much again, and thanks for all the time you put into the concern of pickleball. I agree with you that we all want to be great neighbors and work together, and that's very important. And pickleball is a great sport for just physical exercise, and I do believe how important that is. But in the meeting 2 weeks ago, I think there was someone who said, is it possible to be able to see what we're dealing with as a resident with a pickleball court put 3 feet from our property line? So Mike, if you could show that to them, and then also possibly show them where the court actually is, because the court has been done, but because of the snow cover, it's a little bit hard to tell unless you really look at the fencing.
So just some context, Mr. Smart came to City Hall today asking if it was possible to share photos as part of his public comments. rather than have him print those out and hand them out, I just downloaded copies of them. So that's what I'll show.
Before you do that, any concerns from any of the commissioners about this is a little bit unorthodox? Are we okay with this from a process
I mean, I
standpoint?
think we addressed this in the prior thing because I specifically asked whether or not media would be included. So, and since I don't think there's a timing issue either, because this is just an amendment to, you had made an earlier public comment, so this is just I think more information is better.
That sounds great. Yeah, let's see it.
Thanks for allowing this.
You want me to just scroll through these?
Yes, and then just, if you could just with your pointer kind of show them where,
So,
There
yeah,
it
so it's all snowy, but this square right in there is the sport court that was recently constructed.
Where are the property lines?
I mean, I don't know exactly. There's a fence, along here and along the back here. So pretty close.
Where's the orientation of your property?
it's on this corner right over here.
There's some other, I'll just keep scrolling. There are some zoomed out so you can see like this. So in this photo,
It is 3
Sport
feet
court
from my
right there.
property line. And there's 6 adjacent backyards that come together.
Mike, does this meet current code?
this one, this is the home that kind of prompted the public comments that led to the moratorium. So yes, but there is no current code for sport courts.
How about as far as fencing?
Fencing and lighting were addressed as part of this. So there were originally plans for fencing was always okay. There were originally plans for much more high-powered lighting. Those were removed from the permit.
And it's the sound ordinance we're really playing with right now. I know we've talked about 150 feet away from a property line that would protect different residents from the sound problem, not to exceed that 65 decibel.
So those were the 9.
So hopefully I'll have a chance to look at that. I don't want to take more time, but at least it gives you an idea of what we're dealing with as neighbors trying to be civil to each other, but knowing there's a major problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Okay, additional public comments on this item. Not seeing any present here.
Point of information.
Please.
So more of a logistical question to the chair. Does the commission think that it's the intent that you're going to vote on it today? Because if so, you should probably close public comment.
I think that's appropriate. So
Otherwise, if you're not going to, or if it's going to get continued, you should probably leave it open.
I think we're anticipating that we're going to try to get to a vote today, one way or the other. So let's close public comment. What are your thoughts, commissioners?
Point of clarification, you did tell Commissioner Chapel she was first.
Yes, thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you for
Mike.
clarifying. It's nice to know
Thanks
that
for looking out for me.
at least
Appreciate-
Mike Johnson has your back.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is surrounding, the feasibility of enforcement. So we kind of talked about, pickleball is the reason we're here. We've made this change to include all sport courts. Now, when we talk about a noise or a sound study, and it's a basketball court, does somebody go play basketball? I mean, I'm trying to think through what this means as far as enforcement, because I'm assuming that a pickleball court is a different dimension than, let's say, a half-size basketball court or a tennis court. Is that accurate? Or are we playing on a tennis court?
So sometimes you play on tennis courts, sometimes sports courts are multi-sport, basketball, pickleball, tennis.
Okay, so could you feasibly play pickleball on a half-court basketball court?
Yeah, easily.
Okay, so my question from knowing that is, does every court get tested for pickleball, even if its intent is for use as a basketball court or a tennis court
I'm not probably the person who's supposed to comment here, but my understanding is that you can't test any of these courts. So the test you propose here is a theoretical test because the court's not built. So you're going to say, if you say your use is going to be pickleball, then what does the science tell us about the noise of pickleball? If you're going to play basketball, what does the science tell us about the noise of basketball? And you'd hire an engineer to tell you the answer to that question.
So there's language in here, and I guess my question is for staff about a qualified noise study. And so I'm assuming there has been some legwork on what that might mean.
Yeah, and full disclosure, it is a little speculative. It is a little theoretical. It's trying to add a measure of professional analysis to a situation that hasn't occurred yet. And you're trying to, and it is different, but in the same vein of a traffic study. You don't know traffic patterns of a new development. You have an idea of the traffic it's going to generate, but you don't really know until it happens. So you're trying your best to address the potential impacts of it before it happens. So it's like that, but it is written intentionally broad because it's just a general noise study for however you're going to use that court. And, you know, if you do a noise study saying we're going to use it for basketball and mitigate it this way, and then you go use it as pickleball, yeah, the ordinance doesn't address that well, and then it would become an enforcement measure. But it's trying to address something up front to try to give them an opportunity to say, here's what we're going to do to mitigate noise.
Okay, so my follow-on question is, given we're doing theoretical modeling, which I use professionally all the time,
Mhm.
it's valid, right? I don't know anything about sound or acoustics. But with respect to this permit, are there stated uses? Right.
In the
Does it
ordinance,
have to be stated with their permit application?
it's not codified. It's not proposed as an ordinance stipulation that the sound study has to address specific use, but it does say, I mean, in a way, yes, because we're going to be looking for specific sound mitigation for whatever sport court is going in. I will say in the permit applications we've seen that have courts on them, they label very clearly what the court is. So yes, someone could be misleading and sneaky and be overly general. That's not the experience I've seen. Usually we see a permit and it says swimming pool and sport court and hot tub, and it labels it all directly on there. And these courts have slightly different dimensions. So if they're built to any regulation standard, you can usually see that. So that would prompt the staff committee, the DRC, to say, okay, do the noise study based on your use of this. Your plan says pickleball, so make sure you address that. But if it's just a general use sport court, I mean, I suppose a sound study could be submitted that has some general sound mitigation, to which point I think we would add some notes to a permit. And we do this right now. If there are things that are unclear, we will add notes to a permit approval that says, you know, keep in mind the noise regulation is this, you are subject to these standards. And then on top of that, in this ordinance, there's an affidavit that we're asking them to sign, again, acknowledging that they know what the sound ordinance says. So the last thing we want, we've talked about this, I won't belabor this, is for someone to spend tens of thousands of dollars putting in a court that's immediately in violation of a sound ordinance when it's used, and then they can't use their brand new investment. So we're trying to address up front in a reasonable, generally affordable way, and making sure people know what the ordinance is and acknowledge that they're going to do their best to mitigate that.
Okay, so I guess my comment would be, noting that there is still some risk, right? If we have a stated use and there's a qualified noise study for one particular or multiple activities that are not pickleball, should this use change, as far as an enforcement, but we had a qualified noise study, which technically would be true. So I'm just maybe recommending that we add something that would would help with enforcement, because right now it feels like there's ambiguity in the requirement up front to get the building permit around that item, knowing that there's such dramatic difference as staff has presented, as we've heard from public comment, between these uses. So I mean, I don't know if anybody on the commission has any comments or more feedback about that, or would be in opposition to a disclosure.
I think, Mike, can you clarify this, but isn't that where the ordinance started and then it got taken out?
Yeah, we have tried to not mention specific use, which is difficult. If you have a noise, you know, if you do a traffic study, you're doing a traffic study for a specific building. It's not general. It's not, you know, it's not for any range of buildings. It's, you know what you're going to build and you have an idea of how much traffic it's going to generate. I think we would reasonably look for in a sound study to be valid. Hey, you know, this is the potential uses of this and here's how we're going to mitigate. We could codify that. We could say the sound study shall address the, you know, the most intense intended use of the court. We just haven't, because that's the direction we were given, is to keep it broad.
Okay, I understand that, you know, I'm trying not to pick on a sport, but I do see an issue in logistics for, you know, if every court has to be tested for a pickleball type scenario, nobody's ever building a basketball court, right? Like it's unless you have a very large property. So I'm trying to make it so that we're looking at something that has become a nuisance for some of our residents, and it's not limited to Cottonwood Heights. We've talked about that. So it's across the country. So the idea of placing a reasonable limitation, just not casting that net too broadly, I guess, is what I'm looking at. And so that's why I think specified activity with regards to that noise study seems like the only way to go. Otherwise, everybody is held to the standard of what a pickleball activity might sound like on their court.
I mean, rather than the use, though, I mean, the real problem that probably the sound study should address, isn't it really kind of the decibel and the frequency issue rather than the use itself? Because if you build a tennis court and Monica Seles was playing tennis next door, you're going to hear it a lot more than if I'm playing tennis. I mean, it's just realistic. I mean, in terms of certain, in every sport and every use, there's going to be variation.
And I do agree with that. And I think we've talked about before, the sound ordinance there is a sound ordinance on the books.
Yeah.
That is unchanged. This ordinance doesn't change that at all.
Correct.
You know, Monica Seles aside, you know, that sound limit is not what we're addressing, the level of decibels, right? And so the idea of a theoretical study in advance of a building permit only means something if the study actually relates to what's going to be there.
But pickleball emits sound at a certain decibel and a certain frequency, hertz, right? So couldn't the codification just be in terms of the sound study shall measure it from, you know, the frequency and the decibel rating of at least versus the actual use?
I think the intent was that we were going to keep things broad. And again, this came back to allowing staff some discretion, because I think whatever mitigation will arise in the future, we don't know what the technology will change to be. And again, we can't, if they simply say, well, we're going to use softer paddles and softer balls, you know, problem solved. But how are we regulating that? Are we going to go check their paddles and check their balls? And so I think the intent was to give staff broad sway, where I mean, we've already built a lot into this ordinance that we're not anywhere near the 500 feet that we realize is probably the big number in terms of what it takes to mitigate it. So I do think allowing, it is less specific, and I completely agree. And we kind of went partially down that road of being specific, and your comment that we are at broad is accurate. And I think there's some intentionality with staff.
Yeah, and what we would say, you know, if a sound study said we're going to use padded, you know, different equipment, I think we would accept that. And then if they don't, and there's a call made to the city, it's not dealt with between neighbors, a call is made to the city, we at least have a study to go back to and say, well, you got to use this equipment. And, you know, it becomes a corrective action at that point. And, you know, maybe that's a little cumbersome, but it's at least something to point back to.
Question to that point. What does the current code enforcement over sound look like? And could that actually be alleviated with adjustment in equipment?
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
actually know what it looks like. It, that would be a question for the police department and code enforcement on, if they get these calls, they do have to test the sound and, there's sound meters that aren't terribly expensive, but they need evidence of an actual violation. Typically it's, hey, we got a call, are you doing this? Can you, I think they try to get results first before they go into criminal enforcement activity, but to get to a point of official enforcement, you do need to build evidence and build a case and present that. The first thing they would check on the new ordinance is, was there a permit for this court? And what does that say? And is this in compliance with that? And then they'd go from there.
So currently, if somebody were to build a 20 by 40, concrete pad, is there a permit required with that if it's 3 feet away from a property line?
I will say generally, the pad itself, no. We have certain standards in certain areas of the city regarding impervious surface coverage and things like that we could look at. But if they were just paving a flat grade level, patio or pad or whatever it was, no, that's just landscaping. We don't regulate that right now.
So does it become a pickleball court or a multi-use court once they put lines on it, or once they put fence around it, or once they put lighting?
Well, now we are proposing a definition for outdoor non-vegetative, I forget what we call it, sport court surface or something like that. So if it met that criteria or that definition, then we would funnel it through this ordinance.
So is it, do you know what that would be specifically? Is it the lines?
I'll pull it up.
Right.
It's based on the square footage in a horizontal playing area, but yeah, I mean, when does it become that? When you play it?
I'll also say we don't see a lot of 800 square foot concrete pads being built. Not to say it doesn't happen, but we don't see a lot of that.
And
But they wouldn't come to you necessarily anyway, so you might
Sure.
not know
True.
that they're happening.
And the reason that I ask this is because from a code enforcement aspect, I want to better understand how it's being enforced, because I think sound being one thing, whether it be pickleball or basketball, if somebody starts playing basketball at 7 a.m. and it's LeBron James, that's going to be pretty loud. And in that circumstance, that it then becomes a noise ordinance issue, just as pickleball would be a noise ordinance issue, or if soccer was a noise ordinance issue, that it's affecting the peace of everybody around. And that's where, with this ordinance, it regulates. And, I think to get past the specifics, pickleball is the issue. That's number one. And I think if we start getting the issues of noise complaints for the existing ones that are going to be, grandfathered in, that's going to be a noise ordinance issue. And if we're trying to prevent people moving forward, this is going to eliminate, if you have a large piece of property, I mean, that's, less than 5% of Cottonwood Heights would allow for a lot of, a basketball court, let alone to be usable. And I think that kind of prevents a lot of the benefits of being a child in Cottonwood Heights, the benefits of being, somebody that's aging that wants to be playing outside or doing things outside. And that's where I feel like we do need to be specific about it, or we need to just allow for code enforcement to manage this and to manage the equipment that's being used. Because if the equipment can actually take it from 65 decibels down to 45 decibels, then if they're waking up at 7 a.m. and they're doing it, it's just like basketball. And code enforcement is going to be in that place. And that would then open up the opportunity where it's not a land use issue, it's a code enforcement issue. And I think that that's one of the things that I think we want to get more insight from code enforcement on this, because code enforcement would then give people the tools and say, you need to use this paddle group. This is the recommended pickleball paddle group for noise. And I know that there's a lot of other issues. I know that, noise ordinance down in Mill Hollow for the local pub down there, it's the same thing. They have a decibel meter in there every single weekend, every single night, just making sure that everybody's abiding to that. And if they're not, then they get shut down. And I think that that's a similar situation here. And I feel for the residents here, I would not want a pickleball court continuously in my backyard. However, I would not want a basketball court continuously in my backyard. I would not want a dog barking continuously in my backyard. And I think right now we have the mechanism as a city to be able to regulate that through our code enforcement. I see those vehicles all over. Now, if it becomes an issue, then I think one person that gets in trouble for this multiple times over, they're just a bad actor in this. They're disrespecting their neighbors and they need to have that slap on the hand. But if I'm building a court for my child and they go from basketball and they graduate to soccer and they're doing a soccer thing back there, it's just that, constant respect for each other. And I don't want to prevent personally. And I think a lot of residents would not want to prevent these activities for people that are playing, in their 60s, 70s, 80s pickleball, or, in their teens and 20s to be playing these things. And that's why I feel like we already have the mechanism for code ordinance and code enforcement. And I feel like if we can push that instead of regulating more, that's more so the direction that I would like to be going in this, and pushing code enforcement, not land use at the end of the day.
And I'll just remind us, we've been asked by the city council. So we need to be ready if we're not gonna send something up, we need to be able to answer the fact that you asked us to do something and we are refusing to do it. So.
Well, and I'm not looking to refuse
Yeah.
to do it. I'm more so stating to either approve.
Well, they're asking for an ordinance.
You can recommend denial of an ordinance and say,
Correct.
you don't want it, but
They've asked for our opinion.
the only thing I would
Okay.
say to your point,
We're-
Commissioner Simon, would be, in a way, I feel that having an ordinance in place that provides a pathway to compliance. Right now, I don't want to speak specifically for code enforcement, but they're not typically going to go out and say, hey, your noise is too loud. Here's some recommendations for paddles or equipment you can use to get that noise down. They're going to say, keep your noise down. And if you do that again, then they're going to enforce it again. And it's kind of black and white right now. It's use your property, but meet the code, or don't do that. And this is at least saying, hey, you didn't get a permit, or hey, we have this process. You got to talk to the planning department and go through the steps, and then you can resume activity here.
Could we change that specifically around pickleball because it's such a specific nuisance?
I will again state what I stated in the work session. Pickleball has a very unique impact. I'm following the direction of the city council in this ordinance and keeping it broad, but yes, that is possible.
So to refine that and to kind of get to where I was going, my long line of questioning, apologies for that, everybody. But I do think the specificity strictly in the phrasing of the noise study. If I would think that would be our, place to say, we know these uses are different. We know they have different impacts on the neighbors. I don't think LeBron James, or I can't remember the tennis star you cited. I don't know of any appearances. Honestly, I'd go watch and bring my popcorn if that happened.
Well, maybe
Um,
be happy.
But just in this idea of saying, wait, you stated this was going to be for a basketball game, and that's not what we're seeing. That, my proposal is just to say a qualified noise study needs to have an activity or set of activities within it, and nothing else. That's honestly the only thing I would change, because it's the only thing, whatever studies are out there, whatever technologies are out there, we don't know yet, right? Like it sounds like that's still a field that the city needs to learn more about, it needs to develop. But by giving, a disclosure with that permit, it gives an idea, like we wouldn't want that basketball court to be penalized. I mean, that's my point. I do think reasonable limitations is the right thing to do in a city where a lot of our homes are on 8,000 square foot lots. And so I don't know if there's a way to keep the broad terms of this ordinance, but amending them to be specific when it comes to a study.
So let me know, I've got the definition open here. I'm focusing on this sentence. It says the noise study shall demonstrate that the outdoor sport court will be constructed and utilized in compliance with the noise regulations. Is that specific enough? Because that does talk about how it will be utilized.
Will be utilized. I think if that ends up being in practice, a discussion about the activity, whether it's, okay, we know we can only get 3 feet on our property line, so we will only use this special equipment that we're supposed to reduce sound. Or we will not be using this for, I will only be using it for basketball, or we'll be using it for basketball and roller hockey. Right? Like, I mean, it's that's the discussion. I do think you're right. I mean, that's our window for offering that type, but I think there should be a mechanism. So when there is a complaint, somebody can go back to that permit and say, but this wasn't the use that was in the initial intent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that gives code enforcement just a little bit more of a clear path, and we're not chasing around Airbnb, you know, applicants and like got the spy camera out trying to catch them in the act, right? That's kind of, it just offers a little more clarity.
You're stealing my commentary.
I yield.
Now, would that affidavit be signed by each homeowner? So if that property sells, you know, you have a sport court, a basketball court that runs with the land? Is that kind of the goal with
But
it?
It's not going to run with the land because the affidavit, it would be specific to the original person who put it in. So unless you recorded it, who can?
We would record it.
Okay.
It's the same system we have set up for accessory dwelling units where whoever initiates the application signs the original affidavit, but then it does get recorded against the property. So it at least pull on a title report for subsequent owners.
So I just wanted to make a couple observations and comments. And I think how the commission has actually handled this issue. I mean, kudos to all sides of the issue, because I think it's been a tremendously helpful conversation, especially actually, you know, stepping outside of ourselves and actually submitting public comments. I think that's smart. I'd like to kind of circle back to the public comment earlier on Airbnbs. That's why I said you're stealing my thunder. It's a very, very similar issue in terms of there's regulations that exist outside of the short-term rentals that could apply in terms of why do short-term rentals impact residents? It's, you see some strangers, you have a lot of parties. The problem that code has with a lot of this is you have to catch them in the act. Pickleball can be very much the same thing. Person calls in a complaint. How long does it take to expedite a code officer to get there and with their sound meter and whatnot and collect enough evidence to create a compelling citation? But the other thing that happens also is that this could happen, you know, like 10 hours a day. Each one of those is a citation. Each one is a separate and distinct court case. And a lot of times, like from the research on the Airbnb issue, what happens is they just get dismissed. It's like, okay, I won't do it again, and they dismiss it. So someone could have 20 or 30 citations, and they just constantly get dismissed. And so it becomes this huge burden upon code enforcement, and there's ways to game it. So let's say you have a person who does just really want to run, you know, through apps and everything else, constant pickleball courts or whatnot. It's not hard to like pay someone to like be a watch out, look for the code officer. As soon as they come, game stops. You have to catch them with the actual sound and code, just like Airbnb. They can't look at VRBO. They actually have to catch the person in the act, and the person, I think, has to admit it or whatever else. It becomes much more of a staff spend and a more complicated issue. But I agree, like I think the other side of the argument has been very compelling in terms of regulations for the sake of regulating. You know, maybe that's not our business, but it's also how do we create situations where, you know, people are going to be civil, people are going to be good neighbors, because as Commissioner Simon said, like I wouldn't want to live next to a pickleball court or a dog barking, and different iterations. Like I've experienced a lot of that stuff. It's not great. But I would just kind of remind the commission that if we're pushing this off to code, they have to be able to have teeth on something. And the noise ordinance alone, if that was sufficient, we wouldn't probably be here today. So that's kind of the overall observation I would make. If this was a solvable problem with the existing regulations on the book, why are we discussing it? I'll yield.
Yeah, let me just make a few comments. And I appreciate lots of different points of view. And I've had a shot to make a long pitch from my point of view, but a few things I want to highlight, and some amplify and some contradict. So the first is that the ordinance that we have in front of us proposes one new unique standard. There are two other standards in it, but those standards, we say, these standards apply to everything. This ordinance proposes one new unique standard, which is to say that anything more than 65 decibels at the property line is too loud. That's the standard it proposes. At the same time, it says it's only too loud if it comes from a sports court. To me, that is the definition of arbitrary. If 65 decibels is too loud, then 65 decibels is too loud, whether it comes from a sport court or a barking dog or a hammer or, whatever. So I think the first challenge I have with this as it's written is that it's arbitrary. And if there's something that the Planning Commission should not recommend, it's arbitrary. Secondly, I think because I feel that way, it may seem that I'm not sympathetic to the people who are suffering as a result of a bad condition in their yards. And that's not the case. I am very sympathetic to what might really be miserable for them. At the same time, I know a little about our lane, and ordinance enforcement is not our lane. But I'm going to make a comment or two outside of our lane because I think there is no good solution to this problem that avoids ordinance enforcement. There's just not. Specifically to the people who are here and are suffering as a result of this, this does nothing to help them. They don't get any relief out of all that this ordinance puts in place. Unless, I guess, unless the next neighbor wants to build one too. So I think we have a natural tendency to want to help. When something comes to us, we want to help. We want to do some good in the community. But I don't see this as being the right avenue for doing the good that I'm not disputing needs to be done. If the people who make legislative decisions who ultimately approve or deny this idea want to, they can approve or deny an idea that would actually solve the problem. And that's the only way you get to an answer that helps these folks is you enforce the ordinance that exists in the books. There are several ordinance violations that are currently occurring, as I understand, on this complex of courts. Some of them are about commercial activities, some of them are about lighting, some of them are about noise. But if there's a will to help these homeowners, there is already in the books the way to help them. And I think to say that we'll add to that by doing something that doesn't solve the problem and creates a whole new set of problems, because it implies a standard that is arbitrary and does not have any good backbone in its plain language for being arbitrary. I think that's the wrong approach. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do have a follow-up question for you. And I completely understand what you're talking about. This doesn't change what's there. My question is, you've used the word arbitrary many times. And I guess maybe I don't understand what the sound ordinance is. Is it a different number than 65 decibels? Is it?
No, it's not, but it applies to any sound, not just those coming from a particular piece of concrete.
Sure. So the fact that it says 65 decibels does not change or that standard. It's benchmarked to the existing standard.
That's right.
Okay.
So,
So
that's,
that is
And
not an
it's-
arbitrary piece.
It's a
No, no.
little more
No.
complicated, the sound ordinance. I don't know exactly. I'm not an expert, but it's like 65 is the max for sustained noise. And then there's like spikes, like maximum
Mhm.
peak noises, which
Okay.
are higher, and that's classified
there's
differently.
time of day things and,
Right.
you know, all kinds of things that, I mean, what we're talking about here is a building permit application
Mhm.
that it really can't look at when people will use it, how frequently they'll use it, what's the pitch of the particular equipment they use. All of those things are really, really hard to pin to a building permit, especially in an area where you've never required a building permit before. And a lot of people will build with that assumption that no building permit's required. But the sound ordinance, which is, I mean, is on the books, it's enforceable today. I'm not aware of any effort in the case of these folks to enforce the ordinance. Not any. And to me, that's out of my lane. It's not what we're here to talk about, but that's a problem that's attackable by the right people.
Okay. And really the clarification was just, making sure that the actual noise level we're talking about is not, it's in and of itself arbitrary. It is benchmarked from the existing standard.
Got a comment from Samantha.
Go ahead, Sam.
Hey, I'm back. I've been so interested to listen to the conversation, and I think maybe my role as staff is just to bring up options for you guys to consider. So I did have kind of one thought on just something you might consider as you're talking about this. And I wonder, Mike, if I can share my screen really quick. Are you good if I switch it? Okay, cool.
Yep, all you.
I'm gonna pull up our ordinance, our code. Are you guys seeing the Municode page here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm in Title IX here, which is health and safety. And as I've been hearing you guys talk, we're talking right now about an ordinance that would be in Title 19, which is zoning. And it largely is regulating kind of more maybe of the structure than the impact and than the noise maybe. And it just dawned on me that I've heard you guys bring up like, well, do we want to get in the business of saying you can't have a concrete pad for this, but you can't have it for that? And when does it cross the threshold of being a patio into this? And one option maybe you guys would look at is recommending an ordinance that puts regulations in Title IX instead, which is health and safety, because that's where the nuisance section is. And they spell out different enumerated nuisances. And so maybe there's an option there to just kind of reiterate the noise ordinance and say, sports that violate the noise ordinance in regard to decibel are found to be a nuisance, and they shouldn't be played within this number of feet unless a sound study demonstrates otherwise. Maybe there's a different way to put it in this area instead. So I just wanted to bring that up, that we've been looking at this as a Title 19 item, but maybe it fits better under the health and safety instead, which is more of an enforcement chapter than a development chapter. So food for thought.
Sam, quick question for you. Is Title IX in our lane? Is that a land use question? Would that come before us? Because it seems to me it would not.
You can make a reference to it though. I mean, so this is,
I wish that Shane were here to answer that, because this question does come up of do changes to other titles go through the Planning Commission? We have run them through you guys. Like you'll recall with our last zoning text amendment, there were changes to Title II and Title III. We do tend to run them through you, even if they're not in Title 19, I guess would be my answer to that.
What I think is if there's a land use impact to an ordinance change, it's supposed to run through the land use authority of the city. This would be, you know, borderline depending, but what you could do is if you think that's a better option to address it through nuisance ordinance, you know, make a recommendation of, you know, say denial on the draft ordinance and say, you know, city council, we recommend instead you look at it as a, you know, a nuisance type regulation, and then you let the council take it up from there.
I mean, you know, we've been talking and discussing about like the broad nature of regulations and everything else, but if you actually read the definition of nuisance under 905-030, it's so broad and it's actually defined at the state level that we reference. But it's basically anything that endangers a reasonable enjoyment and health and welfare and whatever else. So, I mean, the ambiguity and arbitrary nature of the definition probably exists for a reason in terms of whether or not the city wants to enforce it or not, and whether or not a nuisance is a true nuisance. But they kind of define it as whether or not it endangers, and it's not a single person, it's like 3 or more at an address or something like that.
Yeah,
So-
and they list, you know, they enumerate those different things that are perceived nuisances, where it's kind of saying like these things are found to be. So again, it seems like there's conversation about like it's not the concrete pad that's making the noise, so why are we regulating like the thing that's being built? And yeah, maybe it's a better fit to say we're going to put some language there that doesn't reinvent the wheel. The noise ordinance already exists, but it simply says, you know, this is found to be a nuisance at a certain distance or a lack of buffering, and if you're going to do it, you need to sign this agreement or you need to keep it this far away. Yeah, that doesn't
I can
probably
say-
make it any less complicated for you, but that was my idea.
I can say for myself, I would really prefer that approach. And secondly, there are some things in this ordinance that I think are helpful too. But it's a little unclear to me, which is funny because I've been doing this for a while, but not this, how one would do this. But to me, there are a couple of things here that are really helpful. The affidavit is really helpful. If you're going to let somebody build an expensive thing that might violate a nuisance, then letting them know is really helpful. You know, you should say, be aware, if you do the wrong thing here, you're going to create a nuisance and that'll be a problem. I think outside of that, you just have so many challenges. Well, I should add one other thing. I think today we don't require building permits for any of this construction. And if you're going to do an affidavit, you have to have a building permit. And so I'm in favor of an idea that says, if you're building outside something that's big, I wouldn't say if it's a sports court, but if you're building something large and expensive, you ought to get a permit. And in that permit, you ought to be made aware that you can be prohibited from the use you thought of if you violate the nuisance ordinances that are found in that other title. So I'm in favor of that approach.
I mean, is there a way to thread the needle here in terms of, and I think this is why the discussion has been so good, and because there's almost 2 schools of thought of like, how do we solve the problem? And let's not just create regulations to create regulations, and let's be very careful about, you know, land rights. So is there a way to, I mean, the nuisance ordinance that's already on the books is so broad, and it basically covers the scenario and situation. Is there a way that we can strike some of the language in what we have before us today that would make the commission feel comfortable?
So I guess my thoughts in listening to all of this, you know, and Commissioner Shelton, I appreciate your ability to, you know, describe the merits of what we're talking about. And, you know, we are just making a recommendation. I mean, I think if we could come up with a list of modifications to this, I think that would be our way forward. I mean,
I have spent a little time on that idea because I think that's very helpful too. They have asked for a recommendation, and there are things that we could recommend that then there are some things that some of us won't.
And do the nuisance ordinances reference this, the 65 decibels? Because it's part of the,
It's really general.
But
Okay.
I think it might be useful to reference it anyway, because you're saying, pay attention to this standard. And it's so broad that you don't know what you're going to be held to. We want people to know where they might have a violation, not have it be subjective.
And it is a public education issue. I mean, in one of the last conversations, you talked about the decibel level, and I got my little app on my phone, and Mike spiked to like 76 several times in his comments, right? It wasn't sustained, but there were spikes. So this discussion about what we're going to hold the public to, that's the time for that to be clear to the permit applicant. And so I guess if I were to say, okay, well, I think this ordinance is of value to our community because of this affidavit, if that they were handed the book on all the things that code enforcement would be looking for, should there be complaints, there's a benefit here. And so, I don't know that I am the right wordsmith for that, but I would like to see us come up with something like that.
So just another, I was just reading through this. One of the enumerated nuisances is a city code nuisance. So it's any violation of the city code is considered a nuisance. So I think it's already part and parcel because the sound is a city code ordinance.
It's a county ordinance.
So we don't have a specific,
It's just by reference.
okay.
Yeah, we adopt by reference
Well,
the
but
county's
then
noise
it
ordinance.
is
Oh,
adopted.
then it is, yeah.
Yeah. So it's already enumerated because of the violation of the sound ordinance is a nuisance by definition. So, but the only thing we have to do is ensure that the affidavit includes adherence to the nuisance, and then it's an education process.
The cheat sheet, right?
Correct.
For
Yeah, I
the
mean,
average person who's not great at.
Yeah, I think it's
municipal
more
code.
of a process piece because it is so generic and it is so broad that it does give some enforcement powers. And I get it. I mean, the problem is that we're never going to solve this because you have two schools of thought, one that wants enormous specificity and others that aren't comfortable with that. And so where's the compromise? And the compromise maybe is let's not create the new regulations. Let's just ensure that we're enforcing the ones that already exist. And then then this really does become an education process and whether or not our city employees are enforcing the laws on the books. Does that make everyone more comfortable?
So I think I like, you're looking at bigger thought patterns here, and I'm saying it when the time for education is before that check is written to the contractor.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I mean, that's,
And so so I don't know if I want to be clear. Are you saying,
I would do this, but
okay.
I would, because I think the affidavit is important, especially if it gets recorded, because you're never going to solve the problem unless you do that. Because you need it to run with the land. And then the other question is I think what's given the commission a lot of heartache is the 65 decibel regulation and whatever else. And I agree, it becomes this weird thing of if you're going to measure it, well, any activity, and then it just becomes that issue of like, we
what is
chase our
sustained?
tails.
What is?
Yeah.
And so if that's
the-
somewhere else, we
It's
can
a
look at
nuisance. It's a nuisance aspect in terms of it really does become a situation where the same activity on one piece of land is going to be a nuisance and it will annoy neighbors. And you go 2 blocks away and maybe it won't because maybe the neighbors are all huge pickleball fans. So I mean, it provides the city with a bit more flexibility. And then it really does kind of push it in terms of the education process. And then also it doesn't hamstring, it doesn't necessarily create the new regulations. I think provides a bit more of a flexible framework.
Could I add one more thing I just noticed in Title IX that may be relevant to your conversation? I did just read in Title IX, there's a section for a voluntary correction agreement, and it outlines a process by which somebody in violation could work with the city to correct the violation. So that could be a potential place to maybe put something where it's saying if there's a property that's violating the noise ordinance in regard to a outdoor sporting activity, here's the options they would have to bring it into compliance. Maybe one of those is play it farther away from property lines. Maybe another would be change the equipment. Maybe one would be do a sound study. So it seems like there is a place in there where maybe you could put that. So I don't know what the preference is of. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Anderson.
Sorry,
please.
Sam, I thought you were done. No, I was just
No,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
I don't disagree. My concern is I wouldn't want someone to build, I don't want, I want to make sure that it's clear when someone is coming in to build something that they clearly understand that they can't do an activity that's going to be 65
For
decibels
sure,
or
for
higher.
sure.
And I think
I
maybe
wonder
to
if-
add to that,
You could require a permit maybe, and so then it would come through and we could do the education piece by saying there's a likelihood here that you could violate this and you need to be aware of it. So
and I
More
think that
ideas.
might be also the place where you recommend mitigations. So you say, you know, here are the standards. The easy mitigation is you're gonna have to move it way off the line. Or you're gonna have to buffer, or you're gonna have to do all kinds of other possible solutions, different equipment. But if you're over the limit, even if you're at 160 feet from the property line, if you're still too loud, you're still too loud.
The 150 feet does not negate that at all.
No, and there's no reason for any setback limit anymore in that way of thinking, but if you're too loud, you're too loud.
So I have a general question, and maybe this is to Commissioner Shelton. In terms of the actual proposed ordinance, you've said that you like certain aspects of it and whatnot. Are there aspects that you would want stricken that you could support?
Yeah, absolutely.
So can we just go through?
Let's do that as an exercise and just see if there's a chance to.
Can I try to summarize and see
Please.
if I can figure out where the runway is on this?
Absolutely.
What I'm hearing is the affidavit is still something that could be beneficial,
Just give us a thumbs up.
Which-
You're in agreement as he's talking.
which I
Are we
think the
thumbs up
trigger
on
to
that?
get people
Okay.
to sign an affidavit would be still to require a permit. But maybe you remove the setback language and all of that. You just say a permit for a sport court as defined is required. You sign an affidavit. Fencing and lighting has to comply.
But I think.
No, one more thing, even more broad than that. So if you're gonna do outdoor construction of over 500 square feet, you need a permit.
Okay.
Might be a swimming pool, it might be any manner of thing, but outdoor construction of over 500 square feet, you need a permit. And that permit will primarily trigger one thing, which is an affidavit.
Just construction in general?
Yeah.
Building, landscaping? I mean, are we not
It's-
talking sport courts at all?
It's impervious surface, isn't it?
Well, if we keep it as simple as 500 square feet, I mean, in a lot of respects, it does mean that more things are going to get on your table. But it also means that you can get them off your table pretty quickly if it's straightforward.
It actually does, and it just creates almost every major building permit, because you don't need a permit till you're 200 square feet. If the trigger's 500, then every single building permit will just sign the same noise affidavit.
Which I think
Hey,
is
Mike?
Not a bad
advantageous.
idea
It's not a
too.
bad-
Yeah, I think that could be advantageous.
Hey,
Yeah, go
Mike.
ahead, Sam.
I don't know, as like not being the project manager on this one, what the timeline is for this project, but I wonder if it's of interest to the commission to explore Title IX as an avenue. If we could maybe have another month to look into that and draft up some language that would do that. And just kind of like explore that with Shane and make sure that's an option. I know sometimes we can kind of like draft things in the session right here and get a motion that encapsulates it, but I wonder if it's okay with everybody, that could be something we consider too, is getting your feedback on what you'd maybe want to see in Title IX and then giving us another go to kind of explore that avenue more
We
fully.
could, if I could just finish though, the Title IX component to what we just talked about would be any noise over 60 or whatever in violation of county health is a potential nuisance. Is that it?
So here's what I'm, hearing here. I think a reference to the nuisance, a direct reference and, if there's anything that needs to be stricken from this language. I mean, I think that can be done outside, any refinements to Title IX could be done outside of this piece, right?
Yeah.
City
I don't think they have to be
council
done at the same time. And
Ours
it's
is just
a recommendation.
recommendation. They're gonna rewrite it how they want, and the city
Yeah.
attorney is gonna refine that.
Yeah.
With the.
And to your point earlier, Title IX really already does cover this.
Correct. My
Uh,
read.
Yeah.
Maybe less clear, but
But I think maybe that we can clarify in the language that we put in the affidavit. And that might get us through to the place where we could say, you know, most of this goes away, but some of it stays, and we make a recommendation on that. We could do that quickly. And
That's true.
then,
You could just include it in a recommendation and then we could take it from there and workshop it.
But to Commissioner Shelton's earlier point about how we're not giving any relief to existing people, that's if we go this direction, that's probably not true, because we've just given kind of an education process and an avenue to say this is a nuisance, the law is on the books, and there is an enforcement capacity for the existing pickleball courts.
and I think on top of that, we've informed the person building the court in a way that's helpful too.
Correct.
And makes the ordinance enforcement easier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for an education process and city process in terms of checklists and whatnot versus just throwing like 1,000 pieces of regulation that are impossible to regulate anyways. Yeah. But I think a recommendation could come from the commission tonight, and then the city council is going to take what they want from that and proceed forward.
So what do we have left?
Sorry,
Let's, okay.
I just have one more comment because I know, I understand, Commissioner Shelton, your discussion about any construction over 500 feet. But I think we are talking specifically about recreation type items, right? So a pool, I
A
understand.
dog kennel?
Yeah, that's really big.
I mean, they have,
Wouldn't it be-
though, in terms of the dog runs and everything else.
It's a very large crowd.
Well, and you can't, I mean,
Yeah.
It's a lot, yeah.
So I think,
So maybe we should make it smaller.
well, I can see where you're headed with it.
What's the minimum playable impervious surface needed for pickleball?
My point is that you're gonna fall right back in
Yeah.
being arbitrary if you just pick a sport court.
So I just think the discussion about, because we're not talking about something with a roof that could fall on somebody in the snow, you know, or that could collapse on somebody, right? That's different. You know, that's
It require a permit already.
That's a structure. So what we're talking about are non-building structures. Because that's a very strong, like, well-used code reference is a non-building structure.
Yeah.
So a non-building structure over 500 square feet. That wouldn't be inclusive of pools. It would be inclusive of a dog run, should it get that large.
Yeah, and you could
can-
say,
but that has
you
a-
could, you could also say, maybe that's the more common term, but outdoor construction. Which would imply no roof,
Yeah.
but your
There's
language is
offering
probably
refinement,
better.
But,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to normalize it so that it's clear. If somebody puts a little garden or a shed up, that's not, you know,
Different.
they're gonna do a permit anyway. And I don't know that a noise for someplace to store your bikes is really that.
So it like an uncovered, non-building structure, over 500 square feet, something like that.
I think that there is a code term for an unenclosed non-building structure would probably build on existing code language.
Does fence
but this is
enclose?
enclosed.
No, okay, and
The definition of
I see.
as you have it now is, it says that it does not have a wall, I mean, like
It's not indoor.
it says outdoor, does not have a roof. I'm sorry, I can't remember all of the
Yeah,
definitions.
I mean, we could almost just say any horizontal, you know, not playing area, you know, some
Construction.
sort of non-building structure over 500 square feet that is paved or otherwise covered with a non-vegetative surface.
Yeah.
End it there.
I think that's reasonable.
I agree. And then you kind of get left with E. So the purpose changes a little bit, the language of the purpose changes a little bit. The whole preamble is about court stuff, so that all goes away. And the purpose is really about sound
And is the sound
Or
study,
nuisance, it's about nuisance, to be clear. I should say that right.
sound studies are just gone?
Yeah.
Does that become a enforcement? Or they're just out? And if you're over the decibels, it's a violation and we don't care how you fix it, it's just enforcement.
And with the idea that the planning commission is recommending to the city council that they specifically outline that in the nuisance, for Sam's recommendation.
And you want to outline outdoor noise or not sport courts, right? Not pickleball, not sport courts.
Yeah,
Outdoor
Just noise.
Nuisance.
You probably don't have to because the enumerated nuisance is already for city code
It
ordinance.
is for the county, but I don't think it's specific for,
Adopted by
It's
reference.
But it was adopted, so it becomes.
and stating it specifically, stating the
That'd be
65
fine, too.
decibels.
Yeah.
I think for the sake of our code, I mean, it's not happening now. And I think that simple phrase, again, that it's not our purview anyway. But I think it would.
It's
I think
easier from
I think we need
enforcement.
to reference adherence to however we say adherence to Salt Lake County noise. I think
That's what the
it's
affidavit
dangerous.
should say.
Yeah, we don't want
I
to say
agree.
anything about decibels or anything else because,
It could change too.
yeah, county code could change or,
But that's why for building code, you reference the international building code, right, or the residential building code versus creating your own, because it changes.
Okay, we are way down the road of wordsmithing here, so are we headed towards something where we can craft something tonight, or are we getting to a point that we need?
What is our,
think-
when does the, it's not really a moratorium, I guess,
March.
but when does it end?
Like March 26th or something like that. We
Is there-
we really
Next
ought to
meeting
get
would be
the county-
February 7th. So you would be cutting it a little close to move it. You'd be kind of right on the edge there without having even gone to council yet, but.
I feel like we could do something tonight. I mean, we don't have to have the perfect language. We have to have what the
Shouldn't-
thought is and what our
This,
our
this,
goal.
Okay, let's get into this then. So the definitions, if we're eliminating the definitions of sport courts and the qualified noise study, that means that we're really down to the definition of what the structure is: unenclosed, non-building structure, outdoor construction greater than 500 square feet. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay. Is there somebody from staff that can?
You have a draft here that's pretty well thought out, I think.
The definition?
Your definition was a little longer. You might add your language to that, but.
Let's see, so.
Yeah, we also have all of this recorded too. So anything you guys decide on, we'll have it documented by virtue of this being a broadcast.
know that.
So we'll make sure.
I don't know that I'm seeing this, so you're eliminating all three paragraphs?
Yeah.
Or just,
No, just here. I don't know. I shouldn't talk to you.
Yeah. So,
why don't you read it for the record here?
perfect.
Let me just ask one other thing. If we're gonna totally change this, it might be good not only because of getting it right, but also because of the public
Input.
comment about whatever it is it's gonna say next. I mean, it's so different. The public hasn't had an opportunity to comment on this.
Well, they will when it goes to the council though.
That's true.
I mean, I hear what you're saying and I appreciate that. I mean, but we are forwarding this as our recommendation of what it should say. And then the public will have a chance to see that and can comment on it from that point.
And I tend to agree with Commissioner Anderson. I think we have been dancing around this for months, right?
Yeah.
And I think now it's finally coming together. I'd like to see us try to make a recommendation for, recommend for with the following modification.
Because if we don't, I don't even know that the votes are there to recommend anything.
Okay, well, let's get back to Commissioner Steinman's attempt at it. Make a stab at it and.
Yeah, so basically we're eliminating everything in relation to sport court. So that's going to be line 1, sport court, indoor sport court.
So you're starting at 1976-010 on definitions, right?
Correct.
So it eliminates sport court.
Correct. So then what we need to do is redefine construction over 500 square feet.
You need a word for that in quotes or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, so however we want to define whatever a structure, impervious surface structure over 500 square feet. I'm sure that Samantha could probably work on
Right.
something with that. And then going down, the purpose, if we go at A,
Hold on, you eliminated the next.
so then,
three.
yeah, so basically you eliminate everything in definitions and recreate from a definition standpoint what the impervious structure is
So
going.
there's really only going to be one definition.
Correct. So we just need to
We're
define
we're
what
not
that
going to
is.
use any of the
Just
text
call
that's
it,
there.
call it structure. It's just structure. I mean, that's the way we do it in Title 19 now.
And to again be kind of a pain about this, because this is my area of practice. I think we are talking about a horizontal non-building structure.
Unenclosed, non-building structure was what you called it.
Not,
Unenclosed may be a tricky word though, because of fences, but
And the definition.
Horizontal non-building structure covers it. I think.
Okay,
Okay,
all right.
are we all okay with that? So
Yes.
horizontal, non-building structure.
unless a fence is non-horizontal.
That'd be a
Um,
vertical structure.
Yeah.
And we have a definition of what a fence is.
Yeah, it's
The
clearly
Fence has a
not,
specific definition.
all the existing Title 19 definitions still apply.
Correct.
Are we going to use any of that first paragraph at all, or are we going to add, so hypothetically, horizontal, non-building structure greater than 500 square feet means any horizontal, and should we eliminate
I
plain
think you
area?
just plug it right into the front. I mean, you're
I-
But
500
we,
feet
are
there.
we going to take plain area off?
Yes.
Okay, so plain area comes off.
But I think you can use all the language paved
After
or
that.
otherwise.
I don't know that we can, because it starts listing out specific
So-
uses later on.
here's one idea, and maybe this goes against code, this type of writing, but if we were just to strike definitions
Non-vegetative
and move it to
services.
purpose,
They-
and call it outdoor construction, this chapter regulates, and then that's where we define it, because there's no new terms here, right, with what we're talking about now.
We don't permit all horizontal non-building structures right now. I think we should define that if we are now saying that
Okay,
needs a building
okay.
permit.
So if we're to say, is there a term that, because it feels like we're saying the definition and then saying this means the phrase? That's what it feels
I
like.
don't know that you have to formally do it as a definition. So in the
Yeah.
nuisances code, there are some definitions given, but it's not for each perceived nuisance. It's definitions for things like premises, hearing officer, emergency, and then it does the nuisances enumerated where it says party houses, weapons, fire hazard. So you could maybe just enumerate it there and say the definition really that you've been kind of drafting of like
Including but not limited
horizontal.
to.
Well, I mean, the city attorney's he's gonna add in the language if we get this wrong
Okay.
anyway.
Yeah, we
I
can
think the
make
intent-
sure it,
Let's go simple
as
here.
long as
Let
we
me-
have the elements of what you guys want in there, I think we can make sure it gets like formatted in the right way.
Let me make a try here. So, horizontal, unenclosed, non-building structure greater than 500 square feet means any horizontal area of over 500 square feet that is paved or otherwise covered with non-vegetative surface.
Yeah,
Period.
just.
Period.
stop there.
Perfect.
I agree.
With you.
This is not for the nuisance ordinance. This is for the zoning ordinance.
Correct,
purposes,
correct.
right?
This will
Correct.
stay in 19.
All right, so then.
So then we eliminate, that's the only definition, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so then, okay,
go to 1976.
so purpose. Okay, correct me if I'm reading this. This chapter regulates, we're not going to use any of that, right?
So, yeah, I think you would do, this chapter regulates construction
Outdoor
over
sport code.
500.
Construction over.
Mike, could you move to the next section? Thanks.
You just have to change all the references of sport courts to be outdoor structure.
Correct.
Outdoor construction.
non-building structure. You define it and you just have to reference.
Yeah, our same term, our agreed upon term. Okay.
Which
So
in
the
that,
chapter regulates our agreed upon term, or adjacent to residential zoning and or approved residential use in a non-residential zone in order to mitigate the use of such construction.
or surfaces,
mitigate the use of such construction.
I'm concerned with saying construction. That sounds very,
But if it's a building permit,
Or you could just say the element or the impact of such yard elements.
yeah, that's fine.
Could I recommend,
Yeah.
I think I understand what's being said. You are certainly welcome to write this ordinance word by word. But understanding the intention and the nature and of the changes, we can take a pretty good shot at it too.
Okay.
So let's assume that Mike and Sam will get to purpose. Is there anything in applicability that we want to strike the whole entire paragraph of applicability?
Well, it's still intended to grandfather existing structures as we've defined them. I mean, I think there is.
I don't think so.
No?
An
think
existing
it
structure is
wouldn't-
not grandfathered against nuisance.
Yeah, it will,
But they wouldn't need a permit though.
that's right. So.
No, they wouldn't need a permit, but that they wouldn't be here looking for one.
But if we're adding to the nuisance ordinance, that's gonna cover there.
I think
right?
that's the safer, when we start going after things that have been grandfathered in, that's risky area. So in terms of
but,
land
but
use,
the noise
building-
created by a legally
right. So the new-
constructed is still in violation,
That-
even if the court.
Correct.
that's right. So
whatever is
Commissioner Polson's point that the nuisance will be the enforcement piece.
Yeah, the trick here is you don't want to create what looks like an exception to the nuisance by saying it's grandfathered.
Right.
Right.
Okay. However, we're not going back and asking everybody who's built one of these to file a building permit, right? So
No,
Correct.
but they can be
That's
in
correct.
violation of the noise ordinance.
Correct.
Right.
correct.
Yeah,
I
we're not
agree.
going to go back.
But,
I
to that.
agree.
but this is really all the non-conforming ones won't have an affidavit on their land or their.
Yeah,
their building.
Yeah, so the permitting, the upfront process wouldn't apply to them, like the permitting part and affidavit, but the enforcement, the after the fact still would, which it would today anyway. It just sounds like we want to reiterate that.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, so applicability, we're good there.
However, I believe that this ordinance
Strike
requires
Or
if,
We're striking applicability, correct?
I don't know. I almost think you should say that the regulations of this chapter apply to, I mean, it's
I
it's
agree.
basic, but apply to the definition you created. Again, because we don't today require permits for these. Applicability should probably just say in one sentence, the regulations of this chapter shall apply to
New.
How about-
outdoor uncovered non-building
Yes.
surfaces over 5.
for new permits to do that.
Sure,
How
yeah.
about if we
To
use
apply
that?
for new
With that?
construction defined above.
Yeah.
That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on. So standards for approval, building permit required. Do we see anything
Some of
there?
it stays.
I think as Mike stated, he understands what needs to happen. I mean, unless we feel strongly about going through every item, I'm very confident staff.
It's more about striking the stuff. that you
Correct.
don't
So
want
let's go
in
to,
there.
so B, we're gonna eliminate the setback requirements. Is that correct?
Well, do you want 0 setbacks or do you want like accessory building setbacks, which would be 3 feet?
Accessory
I
building.
think that,
Yeah.
I think you could say in B, C, D, there are standards and you must comply with those standards.
So I think it would
There
be
are
worth,
setback standards, there are fencing standards, there are outdoor lighting standards. They still all apply.
But make
yeah.
sure we emulate those, and I would just
Yeah.
make sure, and I would reference them by line and verse to where else they exist in the code.
so we'll just say because these are not accessory buildings per se, they're something different. So we
Yes.
will just say they're subject to the same setbacks as
Yeah,
accessory buildings in the underlying zone.
and fencing and outdoor lighting reference
Yeah,
them by,
that's all fine
Okay.
already.
okay, and the affidavit we're comfortable with, correct?
But you need to
Small little-
reference Title IX, which is.
Here's my concern. Isn't Title IX or Section 9 applicable regardless?
It is, but it won't, but you're.
But are we in danger if we only reference that section? Does that then, would people think, oh, well, that means Section 7? I don't know what they are.
No, I'm saying included, addended to the existing language here, so that you have this all accompanying affidavit that then gets recorded in with any.
I don't disagree, but I mean, why wouldn't we just say you have to adhere to all city code?
I think
It's
that
kind of
we're-
covers that the way it goes today. So all land use regulation, including maintaining compliance with Title IX.
Well, because it's, I mean, to Commissioner Shelton's point, then when it becomes too broad, the courts could come back and say like, how, yes, you signed off on this, but our intent really is we're trying to define that this could be a nuisance. You should really pay attention to it. So from an education standpoint and also reporting it with the land, like if I was voting on this, I'd be more comfortable voting that the affidavit really referenced the fact that this is a potential nuisance, be aware.
So
Yeah, the affidavit language that we type up could maybe have information on Title IX and outline like this is how nuisances are enforced. You need to be aware of this. I don't know that that has to be spelled out in the code, but we could make sure that the affidavit document calls back to the Title IX sections I showed.
Yeah, the
So
subject.
I have sorry, I have a suggestion here. Just like we're referencing outdoor lighting in item D, could we move E to F and create a new E that says, you know, use to comply with the nuisance ordinance in chapter 9, you know, outlined in chapter 9. And that's it, right? And so then the affidavit comes after that and doesn't have to you know.
But we haven't referenced noise, so I mean, if we're gonna do that, we're saying fencing, outdoor lighting, why don't we have an E that's noise?
Well, I think the idea was that we clarify, we recommend that section Title 9, I'm sorry. Title 9 be clarified to underscore the noise as a nuisance, right? I mean, I think that's where everybody is going with this. If now the city code is more explicit about, or the affidavit, right? About like, what's the what are the criteria, right? Or there's a, you know, an explicit reference to that piece because that is the important one. That we recommend that be addressed by staff and by, you know, by the city council.
If you put it though as an enumerated item, it would have to be evaluated for approval, and that's a challenge.
Right.
So if you say the language is only in the affidavit, then you're educating, but it's not a requirement of compliance to get a permit.
They need to be, city staff needs to be able to cite someone based upon a specific violation of a specific.
Let's clarify. I mean, how,
Well, I guess here's the question, and maybe I'm stepping 2 steps ahead, but I believe the intention is as a land use authority, you're going to make these recommendations specific to Title 19. And am I understanding correctly, additional recommendations, not language, but recommendations to the council that they add more specific language into Title 9 that yard noise be added as an enumerated nuisance?
But if you
Yes.
include the compliance with Title IX as part of the affidavit, you circle back to it.
It is redundant, absolutely, because
understand.
Title 9 applies regardless, but it's a reminder. The affidavit itself is redundant.
But like, so say everyone disappears, commission's gone, you guys all go and find new jobs or whatever else. I mean, it really does become the intent of, unless you have the process in place and whatnot, or it's codified in code, it becomes this thing of we're not solving the problem. The problem we're really trying to solve is moving this to the nuisance and then being able to cite based upon the nuisance application for any violation of noise or health and welfare and safety violations, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, so a recent example with the short-term rental code, we spelled out what the penalties and fines are in that code, even though penalties and fines are elsewhere in the ordinance. It didn't change anything. It just put it right there.
Redundant.
So that's the intention. It's not necessary, but it is, there's an education piece to this. If it's right there,
They're gonna think, anyone who does this is gonna think twice once they have to sign something under penalty of perjury. They know that it goes to their land.
that's all, yeah, that's the
And
intention.
then it becomes it's not really a debatable point if there's ever litigation.
And it does frankly make any enforcement cases easier if you have taken that step.
and that makes this highly valuable.
Right. But then it also applies to everyone that has an existing issue today.
Do we want to do anything on this for resurfacing as far as requiring permit and the affidavit? So that would at least hit some of the folks that have these structures now. And if they were to get resurfaced, they have to go through that process and sign that affidavit.
It could be
Thoughts on that?
construction or expansion. Typically, you can maintain
Yeah.
something that exists already without going through, but if you expand it, you're then subject to new ordinance.
I mean, modification, right? I mean, is that, are you saying we need to explicitly state
We
that,
might
or
want to, just so that,
in the beginning?
Yeah, just from a definition standpoint.
We can put it in applicability,
Okay.
new, modified or expanded,
It's a good-
whatever
it's
we're
a
calling them.
Really good point.
Because, you know, somebody that, you know, has it existing, they need to expand, or they've got a tennis court and they're turning it into 5 pickleball courts. You know, that's something that we want to be thinking of, especially with noise nuisance and just that the education piece is there. I think that would be very important.
I think this is really reasonable and, yeah.
I agree.
I think
Okay.
we're there. I mean, does anybody else?
I think staff, any clarifications that you need?
So we are adding the reference to Title IX as an E or an F,
Okay.
correct? Is that,
I wouldn't, because I think if you do, then the building permit application has to find some way to show that they're going to comply with it.
Mm.
And when you're talking about noise, you put yourself right back into how you would show that.
So you're
So-
advocating for putting it in
Well,
as part of the affidavit?
affidavit,
Correct.
which
Correct.
actually does have language right now. We'll modify the sport court language, but says including maintaining compliance with all applicable noise ordinance requirements. We could say noise and nuisance ordinance requirements there.
Are we comfortable with that?
Oh, yeah.
To put it on the
Yeah.
affidavit, and then for anyone who has an existing one who wouldn't be doing an affidavit, like maybe we could also look at putting information about enforcement in our newsletter so people are aware of it, even if they're not coming through a permit process.
Yeah, and then we have to really make the recommendation that they enforce.
Right.
Kind of an
Right.
odd concept, but that'd be a good idea too.
You've got that. So
One other thing that has come to me, this will say in terms of what we've pushed out of it today, that this still only applies to something adjacent in a residential or adjacent to residential. Does that make sense to limit it that way, given what we've done?
Do you mean if somebody were to put it in the back of their corporate offices? I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I guess my thought is, if it would bother me at home, it would bother me at work.
Yeah. These ordinance would apply citywide, right? So
I can't think of a zone where you wouldn't want it to apply.
Yeah.
maybe we could strike the part about the residential use or zone as well.
That's my question. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that, but
Staff, will you research that? And if we
Well,
can
that's a-
strike that, keeping it broad, I think there's.
preference question for you. But if the intent and what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is the intent is to make this more about noise and making sure the use of whatever it is doesn't exceed the noise, then I think it's reasonable to just say,
Citywide.
if you're doing this anywhere in the city, it's subject to this. Yeah, that's fine.
Only clarifying question I have, just to make sure, is that, are you wanting us still to explore the option of adding a reference to the way you've defined this in Title IX, where we enumerate nuisances so that enforcement can point to that more easily and say, yeah, this is listed if it's over this.
I think it really helps.
As strong
to have
as
it
we
there.
can say that, Sam, but to Commissioner Shelton's point, we recognize that we are out of our lane in making that suggestion. That would be something that we hope
Explore
that
it.
you guys would communicate to the city council
Okay.
that would make sense. And that's the final piece that would make this whole thing work.
But it's
Some,
it's hard. I mean, to circle back to it though, I mean, it's the fundamental intent of the planning commission though, to use the enforcement powers of Title IX. So it's a key and critical element that city council probably needs to address.
Absolutely. I just, my point is that, I mean,
We're
the
over
point is
our
valid that
skis.
we are not in our lane. So
Yeah.
if we want to look at it and we want to bless it, I think that's great. But I also think that let's make sure that we lob that as a secondary ball, that what this is our main offering.
I think you're close enough tying this to a land use regulation. We'll come up with some language and bring it all forward and
Yeah, I
say,
mean,
this is the
it's
commission's
redundant. I
recommendation.
mean, it's enforceable either way, but the redundancy is better because then city staff doesn't have to guess.
just wanted to make sure you wanted us to still explore that option. So it sounds like that's an affirmative, that we can do, and maybe include that in whatever motion you make.
Well, I think we're there. And
You need a motion.
I am exhausted.
Now just repeat it
I love
all
you guys,
again with your
but this
motion.
is-
Okay,
I'm
Mike,
kidding.
could you
I'm
read
kidding.
that
Don't
back
do
to
that.
us, please?
You all are exhausting. And I love you, but I'm grateful for the discussion. And I don't think we landed anywhere near where any of us planned on. And that, from my standpoint, that is good governance and good process. And I am so grateful for the candor and the respect that everybody expressed for one another and the careful listening, and to staff who put so much time into putting something together, and then we just blew it up. And we just, sent
Sorry.
it back to the drawing board at close to 8 o'clock. So thank you.
Chair, may I make a motion? Is it time?
It is time.
Okay. I move that we approve project ZTA-23-004 with the modifications discussed as part of commission's discussion meeting comments.
Point of information.
Point of,
We're
Before we get
forwarding
a
a,
second
we're
meeting.
forwarding a
before we get a second.
recommendation.
I think we're gonna need, we need written, we're
Oh.
gonna have to wait. So I thought you were gonna motion to adjourn. So
No,
oh,
no. I want you, I would love a recommendation.
Uh,
I don't want to bring this back in February. I think we've talked through this.
you think you have enough to get the,
We got a lot on the record. Yeah. I
We
think
have
got
enough
it.
trust. It'll
okay,
be
all
all right.
right, okay.
Yeah, I
then
think we understand
Okay.
each other's
Finish-
I'm
Complete
going to
your
go ahead and
motion.
restate because
Please.
that wasn't well done. I move that we recommend approval of project ZTA-23-004 with the enumerated modifications
Discussed on the record
discussed on the record
at the January 17th.
at the January 17th commission meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Chapel and a second from Commissioner Shelton. Any further discussion?
Please, no.
Yeah. Are we ready for the vote?
Aye.
I think we're ready for the vote. Commissioner Evler,
Don't get the vote.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel,
Yes.
Commissioner Polson,
Yes.
Commissioner Shelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinman,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills, yes, the motion passes. One more motion.
That was good.
Questions, you guys? You guys did a great job, I think, deliberating, and
This
appreciate the
next
time you
one's
spent.
usually Jonathan's. He can't make the motion.
Do we,
Good.
motion to adjourn?
Second?
Doesn't matter.
Oh, I didn't hear it. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Commissioner, okay, Commissioner Polson, motion to adjourn,
leave.
and Commissioner Anderson, a second.
I'll second that. Yep.
All those in favor of adjourn?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Hey, you guys, see you on February 7th. I'm sorry to have kind of prolonged
Thanks,
your
Sam.
meeting.
Thanks, Mike.
Wow, good job.